October 22, 1962, a crisp autumn evening in Washington, D.C. The air crackled with anticipation and dread, families huddled around their television sets, their faces illuminated by the flickering blue light. President John F. Kennedy, his features drawn and somber, addressed the nation. His words, measured and grave, sent shivers down the spines of all who listened. "Good evening, my fellow citizens," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of the moment. "This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere." With these chilling words, Kennedy confirmed what many had feared. The Soviet Union, America's Cold War adversary, had secretly placed nuclear missiles just 90 miles from Florida. The world held its breath. The unthinkable, a nuclear confrontation between superpowers, suddenly seemed terrifyingly real. The Cuban Missile Crisis, as it came to be known, was a 13-day standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was a period of unprecedented tension, a time when the fate of the world hung precariously in the balance. The decisions made during those harrowing days, the risks taken and the sacrifices made, would shape the course of history for decades to come. The discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba was no accident. It was the culmination of a series of events that had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. In 1959, Fidel Castro's communist revolution had overthrown the US-backed Batista regime, establishing a socialist state just miles from American shores. The United States, fearing the spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere, had imposed a trade embargo on Cuba, and had supported a failed invasion attempt at the Bay of Pigs in 1961. In response to these perceived threats, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had secretly agreed to Castro's request to station nuclear missiles in Cuba. The missiles, Khrushchev believed, would deter another American invasion, and would also serve as a counterbalance to the US missiles already deployed in Turkey and Italy, which were aimed at the Soviet Union. The Soviet plan, however, was fraught with risk. The United States had made it clear that it considered any attempt to deploy offensive weapons in Cuba to be a direct threat to its national security. Khrushchev's gamble, if unsuccessful, could trigger a nuclear confrontation that neither superpower could win. On October 14, 1962, a US U-2 spy plane flying a routine reconnaissance mission over Cuba captured the first photographic evidence of the Soviet missile sites. The images, analyzed by experts at the National Photographic Interpretation Center, revealed the unmistakable outlines of SS-4 medium-range ballistic missiles, capable of striking targets as far away as Washington, D.C. and other major American cities. The discovery of the Soviet missiles plunged the world into a crisis unlike any it had ever seen. The stakes were unimaginably high, and the potential for catastrophic consequences loomed over every decision made during this period. For 13 agonizing days, the United States and the Soviet Union teetered on the precipice of nuclear war. The tension was palpable, and the world watched with bated breath as the two superpowers navigated this perilous situation. The following timeline chronicles the key events of those harrowing days, providing a detailed look at the decisions and actions that brought the world to the brink and ultimately pulled it back from the edge. October 16, 1962. President Kennedy is informed of the Soviet missile sites in Cuba and convenes a special group of advisors known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, EXCOM, to formulate a response. The gravity of the situation is immediately apparent to all involved. October 17th to 20th, 1962, EXCOM debates various options ranging from diplomacy to a full-scale invasion of Cuba. The discussions are intense and fraught with the knowledge that any misstep could lead to nuclear war. The U.S. military is placed on high alert, and a naval quarantine of Cuba is authorized. This move is intended to prevent further Soviet shipments of military equipment to the island. October 22nd, 1962. President Kennedy addresses the nation, revealing the existence of the Soviet missiles and announcing the naval quarantine of Cuba. His speech is a pivotal moment, bringing the crisis into the public eye and rallying support for the U.S. stance. The world holds its breath. People everywhere are acutely aware of the potential for disaster, and the atmosphere is one of collective anxiety. October 23, 1962. Soviet ships, some carrying nuclear-tipped missiles, continue to steam towards Cuba. The situation grows increasingly dire as the ships approach the quarantine line. The U.S. Navy prepares to intercept them. The tension on the high seas mirrors the tension felt around the world. October 24, 1962. In a tense standoff, several Soviet ships stop short of the quarantine line. This moment is a critical juncture in the crisis. However, other Soviet vessels, including submarines, continue to approach Cuba. The threat is far from over, and the world remains on edge. October 25, 1962. During a dramatic meeting at the United Nations, U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson confronts Soviet Ambassador Valerian Zorin with the photographic evidence of the missile sites. The confrontation is a powerful moment in the diplomatic struggle. October 26, 1962. Khrushchev sends a message to Kennedy offering to remove the missiles if the United States pledges not to invade Cuba. This offer marks a potential turning point in the crisis. A second, more demanding message broadcast on Radio Moscow also demands the removal of U.S. missiles from Turkey. The complexity of the negotiations increases as both sides seek to secure their strategic interests. October 27, 1962, a U.S. U-2 spy plane is shot down over Cuba, killing the pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson. This tragic event escalates the crisis to a new level of danger. Tensions reach a fever pitch. The world stands on the brink of war, and the fear of nuclear conflict is omnipresent. The world braces for war. The sense of impending doom is felt globally as nations prepare for the worst. October 28, 1962, Khrushchev, fearing an escalation to nuclear war, agrees to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba and a secret agreement to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey. This agreement marks the beginning of the end of the crisis. October 29, 1962. The crisis ends. The world breathes a collective sigh of relief as the immediate threat of nuclear war recedes. The Soviet Union begins dismantling its missile sites. The process is closely monitored to ensure compliance. The United States lifts the naval quarantine. The easing of military tensions is a welcome relief to all involved. The world breathes a collective sigh of relief. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis stands as a testament to the power of diplomacy and the importance of measured, thoughtful decision-making in the face of potential catastrophe. Section 4. Whispers in the Shadows, Back-Channel Negotiations. While the world watched with bated breath, a different kind of drama was unfolding behind the scenes, one that would never make the headlines but was equally, if not more, significant. Away from the glare of the media spotlight, secret back-channel negotiations were taking place between Washington and Moscow, hidden from the public eye. These high-stakes talks, conducted through intermediaries and often shrouded in secrecy, proved crucial in averting a nuclear catastrophe that could have changed the course of history. One key channel involved Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General and the President's brother, and Anatoly Dobrinin, the Soviet ambassador to the United States. Their roles were pivotal. In a series of tense, private meetings often held late at night, the two men explored ways to de-escalate the crisis, navigating a labyrinth of political and military tensions. Robert Kennedy, acting on his brother's instructions, conveyed the U.S. determination to remove the Soviet missiles from Cuba, a stance that was non-negotiable. While also seeking to reassure the Soviets that the United States did not intend to invade Cuba, a delicate balance of firmness and reassurance. Another important back-channel involved journalists John Scully and Alexander Fomin, a KGB officer posing as a Soviet diplomat. Their interactions were equally critical. In a chance encounter, Fomin approached Scully and conveyed a Soviet proposal for resolving the crisis, a moment that would prove to be a turning point. This proposal, which involved the removal of Soviet missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba, was a significant step forward. It formed the basis for the eventual agreement that ended the crisis, a testament to the power of diplomacy. These back-channel negotiations, conducted under immense pressure and with the fate of the world hanging in the balance, were fraught with tension and uncertainty. They were a testament to the skill and courage of those involved who navigated these treacherous waters with remarkable poise. They demonstrated the vital role that diplomacy and communication, even in the darkest of times, can play in preventing conflict and preserving peace. These efforts remind us that even in the most dire circumstances, dialogue and negotiation can pave the way to a peaceful resolution. Section 5. The Price of Peace, a Secret Deal Averted Disaster. The Cuban Missile Crisis was ultimately resolved through a combination of brinkmanship, diplomacy, and a secret agreement that was not publicly acknowledged for decades. This crisis, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, was a defining moment in the Cold War era. On October 28, 1962, Khrushchev, facing the very real possibility of nuclear war, agreed to remove the Soviet missiles from Cuba. This decision was a pivotal moment, reflecting the immense pressure and high stakes involved. In exchange, the United States publicly pledged not to invade Cuba. This public assurance was crucial in de-escalating the immediate threat of conflict. Secretly, the United States also agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, a concession that Khrushchev had demanded but that Kennedy had been reluctant to make publicly. This clandestine deal was a significant factor in the resolution of the crisis. This secret agreement, while controversial, was crucial in ending the crisis. It demonstrated the lengths to which both superpowers were willing to go to avoid a catastrophic nuclear war. For Khrushchev, it provided a way to save face, allowing him to claim that he had extracted a concession from the United States in exchange for the removal of the Soviet missiles. This was a significant political victory for him domestically. For Kennedy, it provided a way to avoid a nuclear war while still appearing steadfast in his determination to defend U.S. interests. This delicate balance was essential for maintaining his credibility both at home and abroad. The Cuban Missile Crisis, while terrifying in its intensity, ultimately had a positive outcome. It showcased the power of diplomacy and the importance of back-channel communications in resolving international conflicts. It led to a thawing of relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, paving the way for the establishment of a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow. This hotline was a critical tool for preventing future crises. And the signing of the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963, which banned atmospheric nuclear tests. This treaty was a significant step towards controlling the nuclear arms race. The crisis also highlighted the importance of clear communication, diplomacy, and a willingness to compromise in resolving international disputes. These lessons are timeless and continue to resonate in today's geopolitical landscape. The lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis remain relevant today, reminding us of the delicate balance required to maintain global peace, in a world still grappling with the dangers of nuclear proliferation and geopolitical rivalry. The specter of nuclear conflict continues to loom, making the lessons of the past ever more pertinent. The crisis serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace, and the importance of pursuing dialogue and understanding, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. It underscores the need for continued vigilance and proactive diplomacy, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains a powerful example of how close the world came to disaster and how diplomacy can avert catastrophe.